Welcome to Clean Fill Wanted. This is what I made this week. It is a firewood holder for your hearth. Winter has finally arrived here in this part of New Zealand. I wanted to be able to put the firewood that we're going to need for the night over here, but I don't like throwing it on the ground, so what I made was this. I did draw this out probably 15 to 20 times, but still this is a project that I felt was best just going out and grabbing the pieces of wood that I bought and contemplating how I'm going to put them together. When I realized I was going to be able to fit them all together with what I had, I used a saw to cut it in half and cleaned up the stock. I'm also including here where I sawn out the spreader, the cross piece, which I actually did later on in the build. And I cleaned up all the pieces, smooth them out. I used my marking knife and a depth gauge to mark out the half laps for all the pieces, put a step into the knife walls for my saw, and sawn those to depth. I then used another diagonal saw cut to the depth line and cleared that out with a chisel. I then used the respective pieces to mark the lower half of the half lap. One of the best ways to avoid blowing out the wood grain on your half lap is to clear a diagonal on each side, and then use your chisel to just hog out that waste. I did use a router plane to get the surfaces flat and smooth, but you could do that just with a chisel. Then you want to test fit your joints and clean up any edges that are getting in the way. I then stacked them up and drew out the curves for the arms and used a stop cut method with a chisel to clear out all the waste. And I smoothed that out with a spoke shape. Then I repeated this whole process on the back side, and I used a file to smooth over the curve on the end. Doing it this way should give you 4 pieces that will be relatively the same. I marked out the feet and sawn those out. And glued them together. I tend to have issues doing mortise and tenons on angled grain like this. I think I would have been better off doing it perpendicular to the way that I did do it. And once you're halfway through, clear out the mortise from the other side. And then clean up the mortise walls. I did use a saw to cut down the top and the bottoms of the tenons, but I used a chisel to clear out the 2 cheeks as well as the top and the bottom. Just keep in mind this can all be done easily with a chisel. Then I glued this thing up, clamped it, and let it sit for 2 hours and took Ned to the dog park. For the slats, I took a 3/4 inch piece of wood and rip sawn it into 2 pieces that were each about 5/16 of an inch, a little over 1/4 of an inch. And planed them smooth. And I cut them to the length, giving a little bit of an overhang. cleaned up all the edges on my shooting board, but you could just use a file and or sandpaper to do that. I used spacers on the arms to set equal distances between all the slats. I glued them in place and nailed them on the side that was actually supported inside the vise. I then rotated the whole thing around and nailed the other half in. And at this point, it started getting pretty cold out in the garage, so we went inside and started a fire. On the top of these arms, I did put a curve, and that's to give it a little bit more room. You don't have to do that. You could probably easily get away without doing that. I gained about 2 to 3 inches doing this. Through Mortise and Tenon, this rounding over I actually did really quickly, and it turned out really nice. But you could probably just get away with making a stretcher, screwing in from the outside into it, nailing into it with glue, or using a Craig jig to do some pocket holes into it. I was being lazy. The one thing that I should have done, without a doubt, is I should have rounded over the bottom of these slats, or at least put a rebate on the inside of each one in here, so that it would sit a little more securely. I'd have a little more glue surface. I didn't put any finishes on it because to me it's cold enough outside that the ones that I would want to put on here that would take beating, like a polyurethane or a polyacrylic, I would have had to bring it inside, and then it's going to stink up inside as potential of it marring up the floor's finish. I don't want any of that to happen. Again, thanks for watching this. I hope to see you next week. Please hit subscribe. If you find any of this interesting or useful to you, please leave some comments. Give us a thumbs up, some likes for some motivation. All right, thanks. But sometimes you need to make things like this, so that's how it works out.